Hi, everyone, and welcome again to one of our virtual events with Hobby Memorial Library. We are so excited today. We are coming straight from Alaska. Not me, but we have with us CTC professor Kimberly Pace. She teaches government and history and communications, and she has taken time today through a blizzard in order to visit with us. So if all of a sudden we lose her, we know it was a blizzard. we're, but we're keeping our fingers crossed that that doesn't happen. She's going to be talking today about civil rights history, and she's got a fascinating story and fascinating information to give us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Welcome, Professor Pace.
Thank you
Take it
so
away.
much. Thank you so much, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I checked the weather in Killeen, Texas, and I do believe that it's going to be 70 degrees today and not a snowflake in the sky. And I would really like to absorb that. So I am going to transform myself in my mind as if I am in Texas and not in snowy, cold, blizzardy Alaska. Today, where in Anchorage, everything has come to a grinding halt. The school district is closed, the universities are closed, but through the magic wonder of technology, I am here today and able to share one of my passions in history, and that is civil rights history. I am, as Cindy said, I am a professor here at Central Texas College and have been with the college since 1998. And I teach a wide variety of classes. I teach federal government and Texas government, and I teach intro to American history, both one and two, and so many in African American history and public speaking, and so many other classes. But really and truly, I always tell my students that my African American history course is my favorite course to teach. So when the opportunity came to be able to offer this presentation, I was thrilled and said absolutely 100% yes. So again, super excited to be here. So this is going to be my lens into Black History Month. And when I think about Black History Month, I view African American history or Black history through a civil rights lens, because that's my background, both through the political side and the historical side, and communication as well. And I really see this as civil rights, and I can trace that back quite a long way. So we can go ahead and start my PowerPoint if you wouldn't mind. That would be great. And as we are getting started here, we're going to begin with a short video. I think it's just over 4 minutes long, just to kind of give you an idea about where we're going.
Okay.
Mrs. Bridges, are you personally aware of prejudice in Birmingham?
Well, of course, I guess there's a certain amount of prejudice, but I'm not aware of there being much prejudice. Nothing like the people of the North seem to think. Among my friends, we don't seem to have any particular prejudice.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that coming. I know change has gotta come. Oh, yes, it is. There's a time I will go to my brother. Oh, I've asked my brother, will you help me please? Oh, he turned me down. And then I asked my dear mother, oh, I said, mother, I'm down on my knees. It's been a time that I thought, Lord, it's been very long. Oh, now, oh. Somehow I thought I was still able to try to carry on. It's been a long, long time coming that I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes. There ain't no room for the hopeless sinner who would hurt all mankind. Just to save his own. Believe me now. Have pity on those whose chances grow thinner. For there's no hiding place against the kingdom's throne. So people get ready. There's a train a-coming. You don't need no baggage. You just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket. You just thank the Lord.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
That's wonderful.
Sorry.
That's just fine. So that short video sort of gives a great overview of the modern day civil rights movement. But if we can move on to the next slide, please. I really want to take note of the historical perspective of Black history in this country, and also how that intersects abroad as well. So we're going to cover the depth of the issue in this very short period of time together. This is really a 16-week seminar, 3 hours a week with stacks of books of reading and articles and video clips, etc. But we're going to do it here in the next 40 minutes or so. I'll do the very best I can. I think it's important that we understand that we place this idea of Black history within a global context, because it doesn't spring out of a vacuum, right? That this is really something that is global in nature, and I'm going to touch on that here today in this brief presentation. And of course, we want to place it in the context of U.S. history, which is what most of us are perhaps more familiar with. So I'll try to do my best to do that as well. And I say there, buckle up, because put your seatbelts on, because we're going through a lot of information very quickly. And it's such a rich history and so critically important that we understand and pay attention to it, because it impacts us today in 2022. So I hope that you're able to really grasp and understand and embrace that and see what it means for you today, wherever you are, when you're watching and listening and viewing this. We can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I thought it would be useful if we talked about wartime experiences. And because Central Texas College is a military-friendly college, I certainly know that the vast majority of my students are active duty military or National Guard or military affiliated in some way. I wanted to really focus in on this part of the history to start with. And the first thing I wanted to talk about was that when it comes to war in this country, Black soldiers, African American soldiers, have been in every single major war that we have ever fought. And whether that is a global war, a world war, or war between the states, of course, in the case of the Civil War, or even before that in the French and Indian War, in wars that took place before we were a country, they were present in every single war. I do want to pay particular attention to the two world wars in the 20th century, both the First World War and the Second World War. And in the First World War, there were Black soldiers in the First World War, but they were relegated to positions really that were behind the front lines. They were given positions and jobs such as cooks. Maybe they would be like transport in the way, not in the way that we would think about that today, but in terms of shuffling things between point A and point B, with very, very few exceptions of that. And the idea behind that was fear from members of Congress, fear from the president, fear from the country, what we can't possibly arm Black soldiers and teach them how to use weapons. Remember, this is not too terribly long after the Civil War that the First World War takes place. The United States doesn't enter that war, called the Great War. Of course, it's not called World War I. Why would they call it World War I? That kind of tells you that there's going to be a sequel, right? So when it first kicked off, it was called the Great War. And the Great War erupts in 1914 in Europe. But the United States doesn't get involved until 1917. It doesn't really have troops on the ground until the fall of 1917. But there were Black troops that were involved, but again, very much behind the scenes and not very many of them. And there was a huge fear, if they were taught how to use weapons, that they might then turn those weapons against people here in the United States. And that was absolutely, fear, fear, fear. And we're not that far out of the Civil War. The Civil War was, sorry, I'm getting some messages. I hear those beeps in the background. The Civil War was just concluded, not that long before. And so there's that real fear. That fear continues on to the Second World War. And by this point in time, we're looking at 1941, Pearl Harbor, of course, which gets us into the war, and then we wrap up the war in 1945. But there was some of that same fear, right? We have to make sure that, we don't give them too much power, that we don't give those troops, again, the weapons and the training and all of that. So, of course, at that time, the Second World War, we're still in segregation, right? We have a segregated military, which meant separate everything. And just think about what that means, separate everything, separate barracks, separate training facilities, separate, canteens, separate cafeterias, separate medical facilities, separate, right? And think about the money that must have taken, right? In order to maintain separate, right? And towards the end of that war, it becomes very clear that that's very costly and also that it's not very efficient. But they went to great lengths to segregate. One of the most fascinating things I think that happened during that war actually has to do with Alaska. It was the construction of the Alaska-Canadian Highway, which connects what we call the lower 48 to Alaska. And the Pentagon and the president had this wonderful idea of a way to use Black troops. And what a great thing to do is send them to Alaska to build this road, help build this road. And so they sent 4,000 or so troops into the middle of absolutely nowhere, Alaska, with temperatures like at -70 to help build this road, right? But what a great way to use these troops, because they'd be contributing to the war effort, right? And this was just after the Japanese actually had taken 2 of Alaska's islands in the Aleutian chain. So what a great way, right? They're contributing to the war effort. They're not going to harm anybody. There's not nobody that they could turn weapons against, and they didn't really have weapons. They had axes, right? And they didn't have the best equipment to build a road, but let's put them there. And what happened was that there was the group of Black troops in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, and there were white troops in Canada, and they were going to meet. And they thought it would take 2 years. It took 8 months. They did an amazing job, probably because they wanted the heck out of freezing Alaska, I suspect. But they did an amazing job. I mean, it's an engineering marvel what happened and what occurred. But I mean, that's kind of the lengths to which government went to in order to protect, the people from Black soldiers. And towards the end of that war, it becomes very clear this is not sustainable, right? It's not affordable. It's not efficient. And the troops that did fight did remarkably well. And there's this wonderful exception to that, and that's Tuskegee Airmen. I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. But there were troops that did fight in the war in Europe and also in the Pacific theater as well. And they did remarkably well. And what are we fighting against in that war, that Second World War? We're fighting against, certainly in the European theater, we're fighting against Nazism and Adolf Hitler and discrimination, of course, because of the discrimination that Jews and other peoples were having underneath the Nazi regime, right? So they're fighting Black soldiers who are living in segregated America are fighting against segregation and mistreatment in Europe. So they've done their best, they've done an amazing job, and they come back here to the United States in 1945. And they're still living in a segregated America. where there are segregated drinking fountains and swimming pools and schools and maternity wards and hospitals, segregated, segregated, segregated. They just fought against that valiantly, right? And they're coming back and they're still being treated, in this absolutely horrible way, right? There's no equality, there's no equity, there's no justice. And one thing that happened out of that Second World War was the GI Bill. GI Bill happened, and it was a way in which, if you had served in the military, you were eligible for education benefits. You were eligible for small business loans, and that applied to everybody. It didn't matter if you were black or white or purple polka dotted Martian. It didn't matter. You were eligible for those benefits. And black soldiers returning, many of them took advantage of that. And they got college degrees, they opened businesses, they became teachers, they became accountants, they became doctors, they became professionals, they started those businesses, as I said, and it really helps to build the middle class, right? And the Black middle class in particular, and yet they are still living in segregated America, right? Where again, white drinking fountains, black drinking fountains, white swimming pools, black swimming pools. They're still living with this, and their children are living with it too. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So if we could move on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So I'm building up to the modern day civil rights period, but as I mentioned earlier, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years before. There was always a movement of civil rights, even if it was just a glimmer along the way. But I often say that the modern day civil rights movement that we're most familiar with in the 20th century and extending on in today, I would argue, really is built on the shoulders of giants. And I'll just mention a couple of those giants, a few of those giants, names that you may be familiar with. There was Sojourner Truth. And Sojourner Truth was this amazing Black woman, nearly 6 foot tall, a former slave who emerges. She's from New York. She emerges as a leader in both the abolition movement as well as the early women's rights movement. And she goes on speaking tours in the North and is an amazing speaker. And she's got this incredible story. She is perhaps most famous for, people recognize her from, is her Ain't I a Woman speech, right? Where she talks about, ain't I a woman? And, basically, aren't I as capable as anyone else? Don't I have the same rights and privileges? Shouldn't I have equal access to voting and to participating in public life as anyone else? Just a powerful, powerful woman. And I would say she was definitely one of the instigators of what we would call the modern day civil rights movement well before it became part of our reality. I would also point to Frederick Douglass, and there's a nice picture with a quote from him there as being an amazing leader around the same time as Sojourner Truth, who gave that speech in 1851 that I just talked about, the Ain't I a Woman speech. Frederick Douglass, also a former slave who escapes not once but twice from slavery to freedom, and goes on to be such a powerful voice in the anti-slave, with that anti-slave message. He is, again, also goes on lecture circuits. He's lecturing not only here in the United States, but also overseas as well, in London in particular, and advises presidents. He advised Lincoln. He was instrumental in the establishment of the very first all-black regiment in the Civil War, the 54th Massachusetts. He really urged that in the Civil War in 1863. We get the very first all-black civil rights, or all-black regiment, and there will be up to 166 all-black regiments ultimately in the Civil War, but it starts with Frederick Douglass, who goes on to be an ambassador to Haiti, I believe. Just a remarkable life, and through many of his efforts, helps to be the impetus for what I would argue is the modern day civil rights movement. I also want to talk about the English suffragettes in the early 20th century. And these were amazing women in England that were arguing and fighting for women's rights and to get the right to vote in particular. And it wasn't just happening in England, it was happening in Russia, it was happening in New Zealand, it was happening many other places right around the world. And it's really a global perspective. Again, as I said at the beginning, that one thing leads to another. And I would argue that their tactics were absolutely instrumental in many of the modern day civil rights tactics that we will see unfold during the sit-ins and the nonviolent movement. And I would say that many of those suffragettes, those women that were arguing for and being very brilliant in pleading the case for equal treatment under the law, I mean, that those lessons that they learned are then transferred down to folks, in the latter part of the 20th century, really struggled and worked very hard to increase civil rights for all. And in this country, learning the lessons from those early suffragettes, whether they were English or Russian or from New Zealand, we had our own amazing women that helped pave the way for women to have rights to vote, rights to serve on juries, rights for equal pay. That's a long time coming. We're still working on that. But just so many amazing women that helped to contribute to, again, also the modern day civil rights movement. And some of the names you'll recognize: Susan B. Anthony, she had a lovely coin a few decades ago. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her best friend, Ida B. Wells, this amazing journalist, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who were instrumental in getting the 19th Amendment passed, which granted women the right to vote in this country. And they had some amazing nonviolent tactics that they used. There's a really good film about Alice Paul and Lucy Burns that is out. It's actually an HBO film. I think it came out 2004, and I show it in class, and right now the name of it is escaping me. It will come back to me, and I will be sure to let you know what that is. But just incredible, the tactics that they used. And again, from them, the modern day civil rights activists really do have, a step, they have a step ahead, right? They have ways, tactics, strategies that will be successful for them as they move forward. And I did mention the Tuskegee Airmen earlier, and I wanted to get back to them. They were amazing fighter pilots during the Second World War that were brought to Tuskegee Institute specifically not to be pilots at the beginning, but rather mechanics. And one thing led to another, and they were able to become pilots and excelled at what they were doing. But while, again, this isn't segregated America, segregated military. So when they would try to do training across the country, there were some Army bases. Remember, there's no Air Force at the time. It was the Army Air Corps. But there were some Army bases that would not allow them to land and refuel or to sleep overnight or to get a meal or anything. I mean, what they overcame in this country was remarkable when you think about it. And despite all of that, or maybe in spite of all of that, they performed remarkably well and, won awards upon awards upon awards. But when they came back after the war, they are subject to that segregation that I've been talking about, right? It's like, yes, you were at Tuskegee Airmen, good for you. Come back and you have children. You went to college. Awesome, wonderful. But your children cannot go to school. Like, say you live across the street from a wonderful, beautiful elementary school. And you attempt to enroll your children, your Black child, in the elementary school that's literally across the street from your house. You can't. You were told no. There's a perfectly good Black school 5 miles down the road. Your child's going to go there. This school is probably going to be a school, it's probably a one-room schoolhouse. If there is heat, you have to supply the wood or the coal, right? There is no bathroom. The bathroom is, outside. There are textbooks. They're probably old, outdated, pages missing, chalk, if you're lucky, had to be collected at the end of the day. You've got, grades 1 through 12, all in the same classroom. And more often than not, you had people teaching those children that were not trained as teachers, right? And so you have all of these people, all these children who are not getting the education that is perfectly acceptable or perfectly accessible to you, or should be, right across the street from where you live, right? So how frustrating and infuriating is that, right? And that was happening throughout the country, predominantly in the South, but I don't want to let the North off the hook ever. The North had its discrimination and had laws in place that had segregation was part of their life as well. In the South, it was blatant in your face. In the North, it was more subtle, but it was there and often presented itself in employment. And that's a whole other class, so I won't get into that. But the Tuskegee Airmen, amazing, incredible story. But when they come back, they're still confronted with a segregated America. And we could change the next slide, please. Thank you. So the modern day civil rights movement begins, and it begins, I'm going to say, well, there's so many people in the early 20th century, but I'm particularly going to mention a few folks that are real standouts to me. One of them is A. Philip Randolph, a remarkable man who rose to become the head of one of the largest labor union organizations for Black people in this country in the early 20th century. And he would push and push and push for equal rights and equal treatment with labor contracts and that kind of thing. And he's not getting anywhere. And this is really pre-World War II. And he is trying to work with President Roosevelt, and Roosevelt doesn't want to hear it, and A. Philip Randolph organizes what would have been the first March on Washington. He was organizing it in the middle of doing all of that, and Roosevelt said, "Please, please, 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 please don't do that. Please don't do that. I'm trying to fight a war. We just came out of a depression, and this is, and this is not his words, but my words, bad optics, and it doesn't look good. It won't play well in the country. It certainly won't play well on the international stage. Please, please, please don't do it." And they reached a negotiation where that first march never happened. And the negotiated settlement was that there would be fair treatment in military contracts and fair treatment in terms of housing, that they would begin, the federal government would begin to work on that. And A. Philip Randolph backed down from the March on Washington. But he was present on the March on Washington in 1963. He was 75 years old, and he got to attend that and be one of the dignitaries that were there. And what an amazing full circle moment it must have been for him. I also want to talk about Linda Brown. Many of you have heard about Brown versus Board of Education, a Supreme Court case that went to the court, went in 1953, but that's a different story, but was ruled upon in 1954. And it was Brown versus Board of Education. If you've ever wondered who in the world was Brown, Brown was Linda Brown, and Linda Brown was an 8-year-old girl from Kansas, and she was one of 26 children, well, not children, parents of these children that filed this lawsuit, and they were from across the South predominantly, and it happened to be Brown because she was alphabetically first. So that's how you get Brown versus Board of Education. But Linda Brown was that student that I described, as, her family might have lived across the street from a perfectly great school, right, with classrooms for each of the different grades and teachers that were trained and a lovely playground, and there was indoor plumbing, and there was beautiful playground equipment, and they had, the best books, et cetera, et cetera. She was the Black student. She was one of literally tens of thousands, if not millions, that were denied the ability to go to a school that was, in fact, what we would say a proper school. She was afraid. She was denied. Her parents were denied the ability to enroll her, and from that case, we get a landmark decision, separate but equal. No longer is the rule of the land, but we are going to have integration. Everyone is to be granted equal access and public accommodation. That meant schools, that meant buses, that meant hospitals, that meant swimming pools, that meant, no more separate water fountains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In theory, that's what it meant. The problem with the Brown versus Board of Education decision was that it said that, didn't give a timeline. It didn't say integration will happen on Wednesday, right? If the case was handed down on a Monday, it didn't say Wednesday, all the children in the country will hold hands and skip merrily to school together, whether they're black, white, yellow, purple, polka dotted, Martian, it doesn't matter. They are not, that didn't happen. There was no definitive timeline, and it left it up to individual states. Well, guess what? If you leave it up to Alabama, or if you leave it up to Georgia at that time, they weren't going to do it, or Arkansas, or fill in the blank, it wasn't going to happen, or Connecticut, right? It wasn't going to happen. And so, landmark decision, but it would take time. And one can even argue that even today, perhaps, it's still not completely implemented in the way in which it appears if it should be in the Brown decision. fast forward a year to 1955, the world really is introduced to Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks famously in Montgomery, Alabama, refuses to give up her seat on a public bus, which was segregated, right? Black sat in, we're supposed to sit in the back, white sat in the front. She refuses to give up her seat. It's not the first time that she had refused to give up her seat. It actually happened before, but she refused this time and was arrested for it, and ultimately will take her case forward in court. It's where we get introduced on the local level in Alabama to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who rises at, you get introduced as a young man at the age of 26 as the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. And he, you can just see the beginning of his brilliance there. And he organizes the bus boycott, which lasted for close to 11 months. Most people don't know that. They think, oh, it was a couple of weeks or maybe it was a few months. It was 11 months where Blacks refused to ride the bus, and they kept that through a whole entire, almost a year. They refused to ride buses, and that really crippled the economy in Montgomery, Alabama. To not have, you know, the buses running and not have, you know, people able to work in the way that they had before. And ultimately, it's too much, and the bus company, of course, is forced to integrate, and by a Supreme Court decision, they're forced to integrate, and that happens, has ripple effects across the country as well. And that's the beginning of his rise. And I think we know how he did from there. We have the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that comes into being really in the early 60s. I should go back to Dr. King, who after Montgomery forms the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was really made up of ministers, predominantly in the South, but also we would have some ministers and pastors and preachers and priests that join the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in their efforts to move equality forward. And in the early 60s to mid 60s, we get the SNCC, or Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and this is students that get involved. And what's really cool is that you do see students on college campuses get involved in the civil rights movement, and they have different tactics that they are going to employ, but brilliant, brilliant college students, predominantly in the Deep South, but we're seeing some that will join them from the North as well, and make some incredible movements in the civil rights story as we go forward. The rise of Malcolm X, also in the early to mid 60s, with his own message in terms of civil rights and equality. And, you know, he has a fascinating story, from prison to amazing speaker, to, you know, just the ability to be able to influence thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, millions of young people. It's just an incredible story. And, you know, both of those men, Dr. King, if you hear something in the background, it's a snowblower going. You might not be familiar with snowblowers. They're fascinating. You don't have to shovel. It just literally blows the snow into great big giant piles. Like, I have a pile of snow out my window I can hardly see over. That's just an aside. I'll get back to what I was talking about. I just wanted to let you know if you heard that noise in the background. That's what it was. You can't hear it? Okay, well, I can hear it. So, you know, those two men, Dr. King and Malcolm X, were assassinated way too young in their life. And towards the end of their lives, when they were here together, you know, they'd really come to a place where they were going to work together, because they had different ways of achieving the same goal. But towards the end of their lives, they were working together. And it's just unfortunate that we didn't get to see that play out. But, there we have the underpinnings of our modern day civil rights movement, the history sort of behind it. And I have a picture here of Fannie Lou Hamer, which is one of my heroes of the civil rights movement. And Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer from Mississippi was one of the leaders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who accomplished things that were incredible within the Democratic Party, pushed the limits, and really opens things up to more equal participation in first the Democratic Party, but I would argue also the Republican Party in terms of representation. This is a picture of her testifying in front of Congress in 1964, trying to get into the 64 convention, the 1964 Democratic Convention in Atlantic City. Ultimately not successful, but in 1968, because of her and the efforts of the party that she had helped form in Mississippi, that forced the Democratic Party to open its doors to more representation in terms of its delegates amongst not just Black people, but other people of color as well. So we owe a huge debt to Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And I believe we can go to the next slide. So the stage is set. So we've had our modern day civil rights movement, but wow, this is just a snippet of all of the movements, not all of them, but of some of the movements that learn from the lessons of our modern day civil rights leaders, who learned their lessons from those wonderful, amazing people and others that I mentioned before. There were the farm workers movement, Cesar Chavez, and the farm workers, and just the amazing organization that came out of that from the 60s, and I would argue even until now. That still, remnants of that still exist. The modern day civil right, or modern day women's rights movements, Betty Friedan in the 1960s, writing books, The Feminine Mystique, and then that clearly is going on even today. The American Indian movement, which began in the late 60s, rise to prominence in the 1970s, but we're seeing a reemergence in the early 21st century. This is the modern Indian, Native American people coming together and really trying to band together and regain some of their land, their language, their customs. All of that is part of AIM, or the American Indian Movement. The environmental movement, which really kind of grows to power. We have what is it? Silent Spring is written right in the late 60s and published, and what an amazing impact that had on really environmental consciousness across the country. And we have all different types of environmental groups that spring forth. Greenpeace coming to mind, still active today. The disability rights movement, which there were underpinnings of that really after the second, well, I could say after the First World War, but the Second World War, and you certainly see it in the 80s, but the 90s, what happened with the disability rights movement in this country was phenomenal. And I'm just going to show this. This is a great clip, but it's too long for this. I'm just going to show the first minute of this clip. So if we could do that, that would be great.
Crawl, taking a crawl in history. On March 12, 1990, disability rights activists gathered by the U.S. Capitol building. They all had the same goal in mind, to reach the top of the Capitol steps. Their purpose? To achieve rights for disabled Americans. The Capitol Crawl was seen as the most important event that led up to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was led by activists that were a part of an organization called ADAPT.
We're going to march until Congress starts listening to us. They're stalling the bill that's going to give us equal rights, and we aren't asking for civil rights. We're demanding them, and now.
Over 1,000 activists came to the Capitol on March 12, 1990 and crawled 83 stone steps to the top, demanding passage of the ADA, which would give rights to disabled Americans across the country.
Thank you.
The ADA.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me close that before.
There
Okay.
we go. And I just think about the bravery of those people, some of them children, to be tipped out of their chairs and crawl up those stairs is remarkable. As a person myself who's in a power wheelchair, I am so grateful for the efforts that they made. Thank goodness for wheelchair cutouts and curb cuts and elevators in rooms and not rooms, but buildings, so that there is public access ramps. Oh my gosh. But it was because of these people, right? And where did they learn that? Where did they learn this nonviolent protest and all of the things that they did, the marching, the rolling in some of their cases, right? They learned it from the people who did it before, right? So the lessons are rippled, right? We have a ripple effect going on, and it's just remarkable. Special education rights movements for children really becomes prominent in the 1990s, using many of the same tactics. Immigrant rights movements in the early 2000s to the present, we're seeing massive marches and protests, that kind of thing. 2013, 2014, Black Lives Matter movement, shortly after the death of Trayvon Martin. We see that movement come to light, and we're seeing a different way in which protests can happen. Yes, marching in the streets. Yes, the protests and that type of thing, but also online, right? So we're moving now to the next iteration of what the civil rights movement can do and the space in which it can accomplish that. We're seeing that more online as well. The Me Too movement in 2017 coming to really signify and embrace women and their voices, is to say not anymore. You're not going to take discrimination, abuse, et cetera, and that is definitely on the shoulders of this movement. Voting rights movement from 2021 to the present. I'm saying deja vu because some of those early signs that we saw in the beginning was like voting rights, and here we are again now in 2021, 2022. I asked this question: the truckers in Canada, and that sparked truckers across this country and certainly others as well to do similar things in solidarity. It happened here in Anchorage and as well as across the country. That's a peaceful protest, right? It's just a different way of going about it. And you may disagree or agree with the politics of it, but I think that they're learning the lessons that were passed on from before. And there are just so many, many more. And it just makes you wonder what might possibly come next. Right? What might come next? And we can go to the next slide. And I realize that I managed to talk the entire time. Not once did I ask if anybody had any questions. And I apologize for that. That's what happens when I get talking about this particular topic. I could go on and on and on. But I will ask. We do have a few minutes if there were a couple of questions.
Well, I just got a message that there's no questions on that end, but I have a question, if you may.
Absolutely.
We had a CTC professor do an event on our founding fathers, the Declaration of Independence. And in the original beginnings of this country, they talk about all men are created equal. Yet I look back at your lists of, wait, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Where we have to fight for this, we have to fight for that. So, do you believe, one, that it was the way that it was assumed all men are created equal, didn't it wasn't interpreted the way it really should have been, that all people here in America, in the United States were truly equal? And why are we continuously having to fight for bits of different, areas? And do you have hope? So that
No,
was really a lot of questions.
sure. So I'll start at the beginning. Um, the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence were all white male property owning men. And I do not believe that they felt that meant that all men were created equal. I think they meant that all white male property owning men over the age of 21 um, were created equal. It didn't mean that other white men couldn't attain property and then become equal. I really think that that's what it was. And even though you had the whisperings of Abigail Adams in the background telling her husband, don't forget about the women, I really don't think that's what they intended. And in terms of, why has it been, like little chipping away at it? And I think it's the evolution of things, right? And um, as people rise up and have collective consciousness and the ability to be able to push for access and push for civil rights and push for, their own rights or whatever that may look like, then they come together and they're able to do it. And unfortunately, that's our system. And, over 200 years, we're achieving more. Will we ever have equality? I don't think so. Can we achieve equity? I think we can achieve equity. I don't think we'll necessarily achieve equality, because how does that work, right? But I think equitable circumstances, so that the ground is level, right? And there is an equitable playing field. I think that's the goal. And do I have hope? I have absolute hope for that. And I see it every single day. There might be steps backwards, but we're moving forward in a positive progression in my mind.
Thank you. I grew up during the segregated water fountain, and integration was just coming to our schools. So I remember that time. And I also remember the day that I realized that these ideas were learned behaviors. And that was when I moved to a Texas city and was told by one person, oh, San Antonio's great except for thee, and named another, culture. And
Right.
I'm like, wait a minute, everything that I was taught is not the same that you believe. And at that point, I realized that it was a learned behavior that goes on
Absolutely.
and on and on. And so I see our country still there. Do you feel that that's what we're pushing against, is family dynamics of continuously learning the same thing without ever asking why?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer, but I have my answer. And my answer is yes, with a caveat. And um, I think the way to break that is through education. And it's Frederick Douglass, right? He said it, as we saw in the photo. It's education, and it starts with one generation, but that won't do it. I say that it's the next generation has to have that education, and the one after that, and the one after that. I think 4 generations of across the country, equitable education and real education, talking about real things that happen, not taking things out of textbooks, actually digging deeper into the issues, and not just a paragraph on Rosa Parks, but rather, going all the way in, not just a paragraph on Malcolm X, and not just a paragraph or maybe a couple of pages on Martin Luther King, but really doing actual history, and not just that history, but history of the Latino culture and the impacts that that's had on our nation, and the Native American people and the impacts of that history, the Chinese and Japanese American folks as well, and the cultures that are all part, as well as the European cultures, all of them, until the true history is taught, generation after generation after generation after generation. I'm thinking 4 years out from that, then we have a more equitable society, but it will take that. It's not just, a course here or a chapter in a textbook there, but it's going to be equitable education across the board, and that's going to be a while, in my opinion.
Well, last year, our college, our library did a series, and it was life stories. And we invited people from different backgrounds, different cultures to just talk. And we felt that that might, if people just listen, that we are basically same family problems, but there's some social problems that are different. But if you just sat and listened and got to know someone else, then you make your own decision. It's not a bias from this, that, or the other thing, and it was really eye-opening last year to listen to people's stories.
Hearing people's stories can have a very deep personal impact on people, and some of those stories you will hold on forever, and it can be a light bulb moment, and what a wonderful opportunity to connect with people.
We felt so enriched, and we met some amazing people throughout the year. So
Sure.
we were very glad to have done that.
Great.
So, well, Alyssa, are there any other questions? Our Alyssa is always the quiet. She's multitasking.
Yes. She says no other questions at this time.
No other questions. So we leave our comments available for everyone, that if you guys come up with a question, you can go ahead and ask it. Also, would it be okay to leave a CTC email for them that we can put in comments, and the
Absolutely.
links to the 2 videos that you
Absolutely.
showed?
That would be
Okay.
great.
Okay, so we will do that, and that will keep you busy while you're in a winter snowstorm.
There you go, because I don't have anything else to keep me busy. So
Right.
I am always delighted. I am happy to help out however I can. And it's just been a pleasure. Thank you again for I'm just putting my email in the chat. Thank you again for extending the opportunity. And thank you to all of you who are listening. I hope that you picked up some interesting information, and I'd be thrilled to talk with you and chat with you as well. Thank you so much.
And guys, remember, she's a CTC professor. She teaches classes, so definitely look out for her. She's probably going to have some amazing classes. And I don't know about you guys, but this is the closest I'm going to ever get to Alaska.
There you go.
I'm just not going to travel that far, and it's just way too cold.
There you go.
Yes.
Understand.
Well, before we go, guys, let me remind you of some upcoming events. We are packed next week. Tuesday, February 22nd is the beginning of our environmental science series that we're going to be doing all year. And so we have a Greta Thunberg and climate change film festival here at the library, and we'll be playing from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock different films from our Films on Demand. Then Wednesday, we have another night sky tour with CTC astronomer Warren Hart. He's always great. He's going to be telling us about March's constellations. I bet you guys have amazing stars where
We
you
do.
are in Alaska.
We
Yeah.
do. Yeah, not much ambient light, so we can see as far as the eye can see.
Wow. Okay, I may have to go to Alaska at least at one point in my life. All right, and then on the 24th, remember we rescheduled our author night. These are authors, diverse authors. We're going to have 16 of them read from their work, and then they're going to be here at the library. You can go ahead and purchase their books or their autographs. We're going to be live streaming here on Facebook, just the reading part of it as well. This is the first time we've ever live streamed from an iPad, so keep our fingers crossed that it's going to work. Then the very next week, we have another Black History Month event, a military standpoint. And you were talking about the military. We have Mr. Herman Brown, who was in the military at Fort Hood, and he's going to give a personal life story of what it was like to be a Black soldier in the Army. So we're going to hear firsthand about what it was like. And so that will be in person, but we're going to also live stream that one as well. So Professor Pace, if you want to check that story out, that should be great as well.
I will do
And
my
then the very
best.
next day after, no, then the Monday, then that Wednesday, the February 28th just knocks me off keel here.
Yeah.
March 2nd, we have International Day. This is going to be so much fun. We're going to have folklorico dancers here in the library and a fashion show on South American fashion. And that is going to be in person in the library. And then again, we're going to live stream that. But if you are on campus, come and see it. And then the day after that, we have World Wildlife Day, and we're going to have an event on animal conservation. We're going to have a lot of different conservation and bird watching and butterflies and composting and you name it. It's just going to be all year. So, please make sure to join us for all of these events. Go to the library's website, go all the way down to events, and we have a list of them all there. And if you're trying to get a library scholarship, make sure you register for library scholarship attendance credit. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for visiting with us today, Professor Pace. And we hope to see more of you. We were already talking about next year's events because she told me what background she had. And so I'm like, ooh, let's put you down for another event.
Great.
I'm
My
impressed
pleasure.
that your electricity is still on.
It is.
Stars.
Fingers.
We don't have that here in Texas. We fall apart.
I know. I know. I know.
So kudos to that, Alaska.
Right. That's right. We have a good electrical grid.
All righty. Well, listen, guys, thank you so much. And close your ears, Professor Pace. Everybody, it's beautiful. Go outside, enjoy outside. It may be a little
So,
rainy, but go
soak,
outside.
soak it up for me. If you're in
Yes.
Texas, soak it up for me. Or wherever you are, if it's warm, soak it up for me.
Yes, we will. We will. All righty. Well, thank you again. And guys, we'll see you next week, next Tuesday. And nope. Yes. I'm confused. No, we will see you in person next Tuesday. So, all right. Y'all have a great day. And Alyssa, if you will take us out.